But it's a Scottish story. So, where do we begin? We begin with the farmer. And he was a hard-working fella, lived in the north of Scotland, and it was kind of hard life. And he got himself a wife with 3 children, 3 daughters, and then his wife died. He kind of struggled looking after his daughters, building up his little herd of cows and his little flock of sheep. And life was, he managed to just get by. And then one day, there was a terrible, terrible, terrible story. And his herd of cows and his flock of sheep that were scattered over the hills and valleys of Scotland. And the day after the storm, he went out to try and find them all to bring them back to his house, go back to the land. And he was looking everywhere and everywhere, and he couldn't find his cows anywhere, and he couldn't find his sheep anywhere, and he was very, very worried. This was all his money, this was his livelihood, it was all lost. And as he was making his way through a glen, he saw a wee terrier dog, a wee Scottish terrier dog. And the wee dog was yapping about, and it looked a bit sad and forlorn itself. So he petted it, and he gave it a wee bit of his lunch, and gave it a drink of water. And the wee dog nibbled away, scratched itself, sniffed its arse as it did, and then it looked at him and said, "Thank you very much." And the farmer looked at it and said, "No problem. You were kind of like lost then, so if you were looking for something." And the wee fella said, "Oh, I am looking for something, and are you looking for something as well?" And the fella said, "I am. I'm looking for my lost sheep and my lost cows." And the wee dog said, "Well, I tell you, I'm looking for a wife. And I've heard that you've got 3 daughters. So tell me what, if I help you find your cows and your sheep, will you give me one of your daughters?" And the farmer looked at the wee fella at the wee dog and said, "Well, I tell you what, I couldn't give you one of my daughters. But what I will do, if you help me find my sheep and my cows, is I'll let you ask my daughters if they'll marry you, and if one of them says yes, sure, I'll give you my blessing. Is that good enough?" And the wee dog said, "Oh yes," wagged its tail, and off it went to find the cows and the sheep. So the farmer went home, you know, and he didn't tell his daughters, he just came in, they had the tea, they sat down, and later on that evening was wee chat and go, chap, chap, chap. And the farmer said, "I think we've a guest now, daughters." And he said, "Oh, lovely." And he opened the door, and there was a wee dog, and behind the dog was the sheep and the cows, and sure there might have been a few extra sheep and a few extra cows. And the wee dog wagged his tail, and he jumped in, and he looked at the 3 girls and went, "Hiya girls, how you doing?" And and the farmer, he looked at his daughters and said, "Daughters, I've got something to tell you. This wee dog here, he's just helped us find the cows and the sheep and a few other cows and sheep, and he's helped us, he's bringing up investment to our life, we're no longer poor, he's a wonderful wee fella, and in thanks for that, I'm going to let him ask you to marry him." And the daughters looked. And the wee dog went up to the daughters and said, "So, will any of you marry me?" And the first 2 daughters, they were so angry. "How dare you, you're a dog, you're only that size," and went to kick him, and the wee dog went, "Ah!" Now the 3rd daughter, the youngest daughter, her name was Morag. And Morag, she was only 18 or 19 years old, and Morag was a wee bit different from her sisters. Morag still believed in romance. She lived in this wee farm, and there wasn't a lot of romantic things going on in her life, but she used to get books sent to her, romantic body strippers and things and all that kind of stuff. But as for romantic men in her life, there wasn't many of her age. In fact, there was only one wee fella who used to come round, and his name was Eric the Pig Boy, and he used to come round selling pig's ears and buckets and stuff like that. And to be honest, if you saw his face and saw the bucket of pig's ears, you'd rather look at the bucket of pig's ears. So that was the kind of male company that Morag had to put up with. And he was a wee dog asking to marry her, and she thought, "Do you live in your own house?" "I do." She said, "Where do you get a bit of land?" "I do." And she said, "Well, you know, you're awful clever, you got a wee dog there, you got the sheep, you got the cows, and you chased my sisters off, you're very brave. And are you affectionate?" "Oh yeah," he said, "he jumped on her lap." "Oh, give me some cookie." And she said, "Do you know what? I'm going to marry you." And the wee dog went, and so she left the house. She left the house, the 2 of them, and the dog said to her, "That is my horse." And so the wee dog leapt up on top of the horse. The girl Morag on the horse as well, and the horse leapt up and it ran. And it was March, and the horse was so fast, it ran fast and fast and fast. It got to the March wind, and it went by the March wind, and the March wind was left behind, and it kept going and going and going and going, and the wee dog was going, and Morag was holding on to the wee dog's ears going, "Yeah, this is fantastic, wow!" She never had who once was a dog. He said to him, Morag, we're going to live together, we're married, we're going to have a lovely, lovely life. If you ever want to visit your family, feel free to do so. There's my horse out there. You can go onto the horse and it'll take you back to your father's house. And when you want to come back here, just take the bridle, shake the bridle, and the horse will reappear, it'll take you back to me. You can come and go as you please. And Morag said, thank you. But the fella said to him, there's one thing, Morag, you can't tell anybody what I look like or anything about me. And Morag said, that's okay. And so the years went by, and so often she'd go and she'd visit her family, and when she finished visiting, she'd shake the bridle, the horse would reappear, she'd go on the horse and she'd come back to her husband. And things would go right. But every time she went to visit her family, they always got a wee bit more pernickety asking her about her husband. How's it doing with the dog? And she couldn't tell them that it wasn't a dog anymore. They started asking these questions, and her father was saying, you know, the neighbours think it's a bit strange what happened. And she couldn't say anything. And eventually one day, a few years went by, her daughters, the sisters, started getting on her, giving her such foul abuse, and she was so upset. And the sisters, her father came out with a stick and he chased the sisters off, and he looked at Morag and said, Morag, your sisters are just confused, that's all. We actually all feel for you. We're just upset, we're just worried every minute of every day. We're worried about you. And Morag looked at her father and said, Father, you need little fash. My husband is a tall man and he's a tender man. And the father began to smile. And in that moment, Morag felt it. Suddenly, she knew something had gone wrong. She could feel it in her guts and in her belly. And she reached and she grabbed the bridle and she ran for the house and she up the hill behind the house and she shook the bridle. But no horse appeared. And she shook and she shook and she shook and she knew she could feel something terrible had happened. And she was shaking and shaking and shaking. And all the while it was getting dark and dark and the wind was coming up, the winter storms were coming on her. And then she started running. She just started running in the direction of her husband's house and she ran and she ran and she ran. And it was as if the very air was trying to stop her getting home. The rain was coming onto her and making her clothes heavy and wet. And then temperatures get so cold that hair was turning to ice, but still she ran and she ran. And she finally got to her husband's house. And when she got there, she got a terrible cry. For all the windows were blown out, and all their goods were lying on the ground, and all their bed sheets and all their furniture and all the things that they'd shared together were lying scattered everywhere. And she went into the house, and in the house was an old crone. And the old crone looked up at her and said, is it you that's after telling folk about my son? And she looked, and she realised this was her husband's mother. And she said, I just said to my father a few words. And the woman looked up and said, don't you know, long, long, long ago, the king of the sky, he vowed that his daughter would marry the most handsome man in Scotland. And when my son was born, I could see he was so handsome. And I knew that if she found out, she'd steal him from me. And so, I protect him every day for the rest of his life. And now here's you, you've told everybody about how fine my husband is, and sure, the Sky Princess stole him, and I will never see him again. Oh, Morag, she just looked at him and said, I'm so sorry, is there anything I can do? And the woman said, just get out of my house and go. If you can rescue my son, grand, I don't want to see you anymore. And Morag went out. And then the storm was more and more savage, and she started making her way along the road, trying to figure out where could she save her husband. And on the way, she came across a woman. And the woman looked at her and said, is it yourself that's after telling folk about my brother? This was his sister. I said, I am. I'm so sorry, but I'll do anything to try and find him. And the woman looked at him and said, okay, well, you have my blessing, try and find him. And here's something that may help you if you ever need it. And she came out a pair of scissors to her. She kept walking, kept walking. She came to a second woman, who was also her sister, her husband. And she gave her a needle. And she went on and on and on, all the way the storms get heavier and heavier. And she came to a third woman, and the third woman said, you're almost there. You're almost in the city that my brother's been taken to. So here's something else to help you. And she gave her a thread. Well, now Morag, she was almost at the end of her journey. And she came to this great city. And she was soaked through, and she was shivering, and she was hungry. And she went to the far end of the city, and there was a great palace. And she went up to the palace and she knocked the door. And the palace was opened. And there stood a woman, and there could be no doubt who she was. She was the finest looking woman ever. She had black, short, thick hair, pale skin, a blush of red on her cheeks, and dazzling black eyes. And she looked down at Morag and she said, and who the seamstress that's come to make my wedding gown? And Morag looked at her and said, yes. I said, well, come in, you're late. Away in there to the sewing room and start. And And Morag said, can I change your clothes or some food? Well, you finished your work. And she went down to the sewing room, and she sat there, and she was cold and shivering, and she took out the scissors, and she took out the needle, and she took out the thread. And sure, the scissors started moving, and the scissors started cutting all the cloth that was in the room there. It started cutting the cloth, enough for the wedding gown and for the bridesmaids. And she watched the scissors, and it was great. It gave her time to change and get a bit of food. She was relaxing and feeling quite well. And suddenly she felt a terrible tremor in her. And she looked up, and who was standing in the door of the sewing room? The Sky Princess. And the Sky Princess looked at her and said, that's a fine pair of scissors you've got there. I want them. And Morag looked at her and said, well, they are a fine pair of scissors. And I'll tell you what, I'll give you the scissors, but on one condition. That you let me lay where you lay last night. And the Sky Princess looked at her and said, sure, okay. And so it was that night, Morag was taken up to the Sky Princess's bedchamber, and she was put into the bed there, and there lay her husband. And all night she tried to wake her husband up, she tried to shoot him, she said, wait, there's Morag here. The husband was in a dwelling of his own, and he just didn't wake. And in the morning, the guards in the palace came, and they took Morag away. She went back to the sewing room. And now the days went by, and now the needle was going, sewing all the bits of cloth together. And a couple of days later, sure, who came in but your woman herself, the Sky Princess. And she looked at Morag, and she looked at the needle, and she said, that's a fine needle you've got there. I want it. And Morag said, you can have it, but on one condition, that you let me lay where you lay last night. And the Sky Princess looked, rolled her eyes, and said, sure, whatever. And so, that night, Morag waked, and she lay again in the great bed beside her husband, and her poor husband was lying there in a dwelling, and she couldn't wake him. And again in the morning, the guard came and took her away. Well, a few more days went by. And she was sitting in the sewing room, and now the dresses were almost finished, and the bit of thread was going round, just fixing up the last little bits of patches that needed to be done and snipping off things. And in came the Sky Princess. And she stared down at Morag, and she looked at the thread, and she said, that's a fine ball of thread you've got there. I want that thread. And Morag said, well, if you want the thread, there's one thing I want. I want to lay where you lay last night. The Sky Princess said, sure. And so, that night, Morag was taken up to the chamber again, and there lay her husband. And how do you describe her husband? He lay there with a kind of glaikit look on his cooking, as if he'd been scalped in the heat with a hammer. And she shook him and shook him and shook him. Come on, wake up, husband, wake up! And he lay there and lay there. And in the morning, she was taken out of the guards and taken down to the sewing room again. Well, the Sky Princess came by a few days later, and she said, thank you very much for making lovely gowns for me, my own wedding gown. So I insist, as a thank you, come to my wedding. So, Morag found herself in the cathedral. And she was in the cathedral sitting there, and there up at the front was her husband, waiting to be wed. And there was a great blast of trumpets, and in from the back of the cathedral stepped the Sky Princess, wearing a most beautiful gown. And she began walking all the way up the aisle. And Morag, she gave a little prayer, and she said, somebody help me, somebody help me. And then she thought, needle, if you're anywhere, come and save me. And the next thing, the needle came, and it came into the cathedral, and it went up to the princess's boots, and it got the threads, and the thread put the threads of her shoes together, pinned them together, and the princess tripped, and she fell down, and everybody gasped, and the princess didn't even bat an eyelid. She just tore the shoes off her, and carried on walking barefoot. And Morag said, Thread, if you're anywhere, come and help me now. And sure, the ball of thread came to the cathedral, and round its way all the way around the princess's legs, and all the way around her arms. And the princess just shook her hip, and shook an arm, and snap, the thread was snapped. And by now, the Sky Princess was almost up the fell at the front. And so Morag said, Scissors, come and help me. And sure, the scissors came out of the cathedral, and came all the way down the aisle, turning the blades out, flashing, and it came all the way down, up to the Sky Princess's back, and they were about to step into the back when the Sky Princess turned around and whacked the scissors away with one arm. And that scissors cut her arm. And the scissors came out again, and the Sky Princess started to fight with scissors. She would punch them, she would whack them, she would always kung fu kicks and all that kind of stuff. The scissors cut bits of clothes and bits of skin, there was blood everywhere. And eventually, the poor Sky Princess was exhausted. and his scissors were waiting in the air in front of him, and they were turning and turning, and then he came straight at her throat. And just then, Morag jumped up in front of the Sky Princess and said, "Stop!" And his scissors stuck in the air and fell onto the ground. And Morag turned round, and the Sky Princess looked up at her. And she put her hand up, and she grabbed it, and she took herself up. And she got a hold of Morag's chin, and she looked at her and she said, "Thank you for saving my life. What can I do for you?" And Morag looked at her and said, "You know what you can do for me. Give me back my husband." And so it was. She was given back her husband. And they lived happily ever after. But still, in Scotland to this day, there are women, when they give birth to children, and they're men children, and they're handsome, they won't tell anybody how good looking their sons are, for fear the Sky Princess will come and steal them. Thank you.